What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. Facts about Mary Shelley. So goth they sound made up, but aren't. Mary Shelley, Goth Queen, is best known for writing the dark story of Frankenstein. While fact and fiction are normally distant, the life of this brilliant Gothic novelist was almost as dark and disturbing as the book itself. Mary Shelley had a strange childhood that led to an unfortunate adult life with lots of twists and turns. It might not have been ideal for her to live through, but it sure is intriguing to any book lovers, much like the life of Lord Byron was. Here are some Mary Shelley facts that are so surreal they seem like they come straight out of her writing. As a child, she loved to read by her mother's grave. Mary Shelley's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, passed shortly after giving birth to her. This was an event that haunted Shelley for the remainder of her life. Since she didn't get to grow up beside her mother, she spent as much time near her mother's grave as possible. As literary critic Sandra M. Gilbert wrote, Mary Shelley's only real mother was a tombstone. At first, Shelley visited her mother's grave with her father, William Godwin. But after her father remarried, she continued to visit the site on her own. She spent a lot of time reading in the graveyard, often her mother's work, since her mother was also a talented author. She started writing Frankenstein after a rainy day spent reading ghost stories. Mary Shelley and her husband Percy were traveling around Europe when Shelley began writing Frankenstein. During a rainy day in Switzerland, the couple met up with Claire Clairmont, Lord Byron, and John Polidori. To pass the time, the group found themselves reading ghost stories amid the dreary weather. After a day of reading, Byron suggested that they should all try writing their own ghost stories. So, Shelley finally took the time to start writing Frankenstein, which later became her most famous novel. She and Percy Bysshe Shelley may have gotten intimate in a cemetery. Mary Shelley and future husband Percy Bysshe Shelley's first interactions often occurred in cemeteries, where Shelley clearly felt comfortable. Percy was an admirer of Shelley's father, but he and Shelley soon had a connection, despite her being 16 and him being 21. The two spent lots of time together in the graveyard where her mother was buried. While Shelley's dad likely assumed she and Percy were simply going for walks and chatting among the graveyard, it seems that they did much more than just that. They declared their love for each other in the graveyard, which led to them having intimate relations for the first time in that very spot. Her life was marked by the loss of her loved ones. Mary Shelley suffered loss throughout her life. Not only did she have to say goodbye to her mother at such a young age, but she also struggled to be a parent herself. Of her 5 children, 4 of them perished shortly after birth. Percy Florence was her only child to live to be an adult. However, only a few years after that son was born, her husband drowned while sailing. This made Shelley a widow at only age 24. Supporting her son on her own was hard enough, but she refused to give up writing. Before her husband's passing, she also lost her half-sister Fanny, who took her own life. Her inspiration for Frankenstein came to her in a nightmare. It's no surprise that a story about a monster first appeared in a nightmare. While Mary Shelley first started writing the novel during a dreary night filled with ghost stories, it was one particular dream that helped inspire her. Before writing the book, Shelley and her husband visited the Frankenstein castle, where they likely heard stories of alchemist Johann Conrad Dippel. Dippel was rumored to have robbed graves and found ways to reanimate limbs. This tale is likely what prompted her inspirational nightmare. In the preface of her novel, Shelley described her terrible dream. I saw with shut eyes but acute mental vision. I saw the pale student of the unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. She fled England to be with Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was married at the time. Mary Shelley's relationship with Percy Bysshe Shelley wasn't quite as romantic as some might think. When she first became close to him at 16 years old, he was 21 years old and her father's acquaintance. To make matters worse, Percy was married to another 16-year-old who was pregnant. When Shelley's dad found out about the affair, he tried to stop it, but it only caused Shelley and Percy to become closer. Shelley fled England and eloped with Percy in France. The couple finally got married in 1816, after Percy's first wife took her own life. Her marriage was full of scandal and was incredibly dramatic. Clearly, Percy Shelley was not the most faithful husband. Not only was he married to someone else when he began romancing Mary, but he also may have had an affair with Mary's stepsister Claire Claremont. When Mary and Percy fled England, Claremont tagged along to explore Europe, which is when the affair possibly occurred. Mary was often left alone while Percy visited his first wife. It is thought that she turned to Thomas Jefferson Hogg when she was feeling lonely. It's possible that Percy even encouraged a relationship between them after feeling guilty about his affair with Claremont. However, Mary made it clear that she only wanted a romantic relationship with Percy and no one else. She published Frankenstein anonymously out of fear she would lose her children. After completing Frankenstein, Mary Shelley chose to publish it anonymously. At the time, it was believed that female authors wouldn't be accepted by the public. So, she felt it was best for her family if her name was not linked to the book. When the book was first released, reviewers quickly assumed that the book was written by someone close to William Godwin, who was Shelley's father. However, they quickly guessed that Shelley's husband Percy was the author instead, so he was soon credited for her work. In 1823, Shelley finally got proper credit for the novel, but many critics were still skeptical. Evidence from notebooks shows that Percy at least helped edit the novel due to some written corrections on the pages. She was buried with the cremated remains of her husband's heart. Mary Shelley passed in 1851 at age 53 due to brain cancer. She was buried at St. Peter's Church in Bournemouth, but she was not alone. The cremated remains of Percy Bysshe Shelley's heart were buried with her, despite him having passed decades ago. After Shelley's tragic demise, her son Percy and his wife Jane moved the remains of Shelley's parents and buried them beside Shelley's tomb. She began writing Frankenstein when she was only a teenager. Mary Shelley was very mature for her age. Not only did she meet her husband at the age of 16, but she also began writing Frankenstein when she was only 18. By the time she finished writing it, she was 19. And by the time Frankenstein was published in 1818, she was 20 years old. This caused many people to wonder how such a young woman could create a classic novel. Her parents were radicals. Mary Shelley's mother and father were considered radicals, which meant they advocated for complete political and social reform and spoke very strongly about their beliefs. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, was the author of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Her father, William Godwin, was a political philosopher and novelist. Thus, both of them were notorious radicals during their time. Godwin may have believed in anarchism, but he also followed some contemporary conventions. He was always quick to have a stance on something, such as when he cut off Shelley after she eloped with Percy at age 16. When Frankenstein was first released, critics hated it. When Frankenstein was first released, it wasn't thought as highly of as it is today. The idea of a mad scientist creating life was horrific to readers at first. Many critics thought the story went against religion because it featured a man who tried to make life like God. Some people even thought that the writer must be as cruel and terrible as the book's concept, calling the book horrible and disgusting. Critics were even harsher at the idea of a young woman writing the novel. Since the book was anonymous at first, no one even suspected that a woman could have written it. But even when Mary Shelley's identity was revealed, many critics refused to believe that she was the author. However, that made Shelley want to work even harder as a writer. One Frankenstein introduction reads, "Mary was determined not only to write books like her mother, but also to live with the same kind of freedom. She too would break the rules of society." Mary Shelley, the eternal Goth queen of literature, didn't just write a haunting masterpiece, she lived one. The woman who gave the world Frankenstein, a novel about resurrecting the dead and grappling with the horrifying implications of man's reach exceeding his grasp, had a life so dark, so macabre, and so beautifully tragic that it reads like Gothic fiction come to life. Her entire existence was a strange blend of sorrow, scandal, cemeteries, corpses, intellectualism, nightmares, and revolutionary thought, making her not only a literary pioneer but also an icon of Gothic sensibility that bled into every aspect of her biography. From the moment she was born, under the literal shadow of death, her mother, the brilliant feminist philosopher Mary Wollstonecraft, died just days after childbirth. Mary was orphaned by tragedy. Yet that grief didn't isolate her from her mother's legacy. Rather, it tethered her to it. As a child, Mary Shelley would often go to her mother's grave in St. Pancras churchyard and read, sometimes her mother's own works, while sitting directly on the tombstone. It became her favorite retreat, and as biographer Sandra Gilbert once wrote, Mary Shelley's only real mother was a tombstone. If that's not goth enough for you, consider this. That same graveyard was where she would meet and fall in love with the married poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. Theirs was a romance soaked in scandal and shadows. Percy was not only 5 years her senior but also married to another 16-year-old named Harriet, who was pregnant with his child at the time. Yet Mary, who was just 16 when their affair began, didn't let that stop her. The two met frequently at her mother's grave, and it is widely believed, based on Mary's own recollections and the scandalized rumors of the time, that it was in that cemetery, on or near her mother's grave, that Mary lost her virginity to Percy. That single Gothic image, a teenage girl, orphaned by death, lying with a married man among the tombstones, encapsulates the raw, eerie poetry of her life. When Mary and Percy fled England, running off to Europe with no money and plenty of enemies, they brought with them her stepsister Claire Clairmont, who would later become Lord Byron's lover and the mother of his child. The three of them traveled Europe like wandering ghosts, writing, mourning, and living outside the bounds of convention. Then came that famous night at Lake Geneva in 1816, the now mythologized year without a summer, when a volcanic eruption had blotted out the sun and caused massive climate disruptions. Trapped indoors by rain and gloom with Percy, Claire, Lord Byron, and Byron's Dr. John Polidori, the group entertained themselves by reading German ghost stories. When Byron proposed that each of them write their own tale of terror, Mary's teenage brain, already filled with graveyard musings, romantic agony, and existential dread, gave birth to a waking nightmare. She dreamed of a pale scientist kneeling beside a corpse he had stitched together, bringing it to life with a jolt of unnatural energy. I saw, with shut eyes but acute mental vision, the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, she would later write of that vision. That dream became Frankenstein, a novel she started at 18 and published at 20, a feat nearly unthinkable for a young woman in the early 19th century, especially one navigating the social stigma of scandal and illegitimacy. And yet Mary Shelley didn't just write a novel. She created a cultural archetype, the mad scientist and his monstrous offspring, a story that has never stopped resonating. But even after creating an immortal literary legacy, Mary's life continued to unravel in ways too heartbreaking for fiction. She suffered the deaths of 3 of her children in infancy. Her fourth, William, died of malaria in Italy at the age of 3. The only child to survive into adulthood was Percy Florence, her youngest. Meanwhile, her husband drowned in a sudden storm while sailing off the coast of Italy in 1822. His body found days later in a state of decomposition. In one of the strangest and most grotesquely romantic acts in literary history, his heart, unburned in the cremation, was retrieved by a friend and eventually wrapped in one of Mary's poems. It is believed Mary kept Percy's desiccated heart in her desk drawer for years. When she died in 1851 at the age of 53 from a brain tumor, that same heart was buried with her. Yes, Mary Shelley was literally buried with the shriveled heart of her dead husband. Could anything be more goth? And if that weren't dramatic enough, her life was also touched by suicide and madness on nearly every side. Her half-sister Fanny Imlay died by suicide, likely because she felt unloved and displaced by Mary and Percy's intense relationship. Percy's first wife Harriet also took her own life, drowning herself in the Serpentine River while pregnant and abandoned. Mary's father, the famous anarchist William Godwin, was a man of intense moral conviction who also proved quick to disown her when she disobeyed him. He only reconciled with her once Percy paid off some of his debts. Mary Shelley, radical daughter of radicals, lived a life of both intellectual liberation and personal devastation. She surrounded herself with people who pushed boundaries. Lord Byron, who slept with his sister and scandalized all of England. Polidori, whose vampire story predated Dracula and may have inspired it. And Percy, whose poetry was brilliant but whose morality was dubious at best. Her marriage to Percy was far from perfect. He was emotionally erratic and often unfaithful, possibly even sleeping with her stepsister Claire, who continued to travel with them. At one point, Percy allegedly suggested that Mary take a lover of her own, perhaps his friend Thomas Jefferson Hogg, in an effort to create a sort of intellectual ménage à trois. Mary was not interested, telling Percy she only wanted him, though the tension clearly wore on her. After Percy's death, Mary never remarried. She remained devoted to his memory, raising their son alone and editing Percy's poetry and writings for posthumous publication, ensuring his legacy even while she struggled to preserve her own. And yes, when Frankenstein was first published, it wasn't even attributed to her. It was anonymous. People assumed Percy was the author, especially since he had written the introduction. Critics praised the book's philosophical daring but attacked its author's supposed depravity. When it was revealed that Mary, a woman and a young one at that, had written it, many dismissed it as impossible. They argued she was too young, too inexperienced, too female to have crafted such a profound narrative. But Mary didn't let their skepticism silence her. She continued to write, publishing several more novels, including The Last Man, which eerily predicted a global plague wiping out humanity, and Valperga, a historical novel that explored politics and feminism. Yet none of her other works achieved the fame of Frankenstein, a novel that was deeply personal, stemming from both her dreams and her losses. She had visited Frankenstein Castle with Percy before writing the book, and there they likely heard stories of Johann Conrad Dippel, a real-life alchemist rumored to rob graves and conduct grotesque experiments in resurrection. That fusion of historical rumor, nightmare imagery, and personal grief gave Frankenstein its visceral power. It's not just a story about creating life. It's about abandonment, the pain of parental failure, the consequences of unchecked ambition, and the agony of existing without love. In many ways, the creature mirrors Mary herself, a lonely figure seeking understanding and rejected by society. Her entire life was a defiance of norms, a confrontation with death, and a meditation on what it means to create and be destroyed. Even after her death, the Gothic thread remained. Her son Percy Florence and his wife Jane exhumed the remains of Mary's parents, Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, and buried them beside her. Today, in Bournemouth, England, you can visit a tomb that contains the woman who wrote Frankenstein, the man whose heart she kept in her drawer, and the two radicals who birthed her both physically and ideologically. A family united in death, in literature, in revolution. And if that's not Goth, nothing is. From writing a novel that changed the world while still a teenager, to mourning most of her loved ones before the age of 30, to creating a legacy that is still discussed, adapted, and admired 2 centuries later, Mary Shelley's life was an unending tapestry of heartbreak, brilliance, and eerie poetry. She was a pioneer of science fiction, a feminist before the term existed, a mother, a widow, and a mythmaker. Her story proves that sometimes truth is not only stranger than fiction, it's darker, sadder, and infinitely more poetic. Mary Shelley didn't just write Gothic literature. She lived it, breathed it, and became its high priestess, proving once and for all that the Gothist stories aren't just written. They are survived. A lot of weird stuff went down during the Victorian era, thanks in large part to the spirit of exploration and innovation that persisted during the period. Despite Victorian thinkers' pioneering attitudes, death and disease loomed around every corner. How is it that the same epoch that birthed Darwin's theory of evolution also popularized green wallpaper and clothing laced with poisonous arsenic? These dichotomies created a culture of contradictions, one fueled by population booms, large class divides, and strict moral codes. While history books focus on the Industrial Revolution, Queen Victoria's political reign, and all the social reforms that defined the era, day-to-day life for Victorians lent itself to some very singular customs and norms, ranging from wacky to fatal. Some of these Victorian habits are so outlandish that they don't seem real at all. In fact, they sound positively fictitious. Around the 1840s, both England and America introduced cheap, flat rates for postage that led to a surge in letter exchanges. London was the epicenter of this postal revolution, boasting a mail service that traveled to homes 12 times a day. As historian Catherine J. Golden puts it in her book Posting It, The Victorian Revolution in Letter Writing, in London people complained if a letter didn't arrive in a couple of hours. Victorians sent much more than words to each other. It wasn't uncommon for a recipient to find a package full of bugs, tree cuttings, or manure on their doorstep.